Max and Lucy first crossed paths at a lively get-together hosted by some mutual friends. That evening, what began as casual small talk quickly turned into heartfelt conversations. They uncovered a surprising number of common interests, and both walked away from the night with an uncanny feeling, as if their meeting hadn't been accidental at all. It felt like fate had stepped in. Their bond deepened almost overnight. Within just a few short months, Max asked Lucy to move into his apartment. As luck would have it, he'd recently taken out a mortgage, and his steady income was more than enough to cover the payments without much strain. Half a year into living under the same roof, the couple decided to make things official. They exchanged vows and stepped into married life hand in hand. Lucy wasn't tied to the typical office grind like most people. Instead, she nurtured a lifelong love for sewing, something she'd been drawn to since she was a little girl. Long before she became Mrs. Max, she already owned a well-worn sewing machine. After their wedding, Max, ever the supportive husband, gifted her more tools of the trade, including a dressmaker's mannequin. He even carved out a cozy little corner in their home where she could fully immerse herself in her craft. What had once been a personal passion slowly blossomed into a modest business, fueled mostly by word of mouth and the quiet buzz of happy clients. While Max was out the door early every morning, heading into the structured world of office life, Lucy enjoyed a slower rhythm. She typically rolled out of bed around 10, easing into her workday. If she didn't have any customer orders to work on, she'd design clothes just for the fun of it, her creativity often too restless to sit still. Come dinner, when Max would ask how her day went, more often than not, she'd reveal she hadn't left her sewing nook even once. At first, Max found her hermit-like habits a little unsettling, but over time, he came to find comfort in them. He knew Lucy wasn't the type to chase wild experiences or court unnecessary drama. She was, in his eyes, a gentle, homey soul, completely devoted to her craft, averse to chaos, and uninterested in social butterflies or flashy scenes. In other words, he believed there was nothing to be suspicious about. But as life tends to prove, appearances can be deceiving, and Max was about to learn that lesson the hard way. It happened one afternoon during the office lunch hour. Max and a few coworkers decided to head downstairs to the building's main cafeteria. A familiar haunt, though they sometimes opted for a nearby cafe just to switch things up. Max stood in front of the glass food counter, his hands casually tucked beneath his chin as he scanned the options. That's when Alex, a colleague from his department, leaned over and said, "You look kinda off today. Something eating at you?" "Nothing major. Just feeling a little off today," Max replied, trying to shake the mood as a faint smile tugged at his lips. "I'm used to Lucy's cooking. She's honestly a wizard in the kitchen. Homemade meals from her? Nothing else compares." Alex let out a short laugh, raising an eyebrow. "Seriously though, how does she do it? She barely ever leaves the house, right? Practically lives in her sewing room. She's kind of off the grid." The way Alex spoke, so casually, yet with a hint of something unspoken, put Max slightly on edge. The odd tone, the way he studied Max's face, made his gut twist just a bit. Then Alex added, almost as an afterthought, "You sure about that? 'Cause I swear I saw Lucy at a restaurant not too long ago, look just like her." Max dismissed the idea with a quiet laugh, confident that Alex had mistaken someone else for his wife. "No way," he said, shaking his head. "I always know where she is." Alex didn't push. He shrugged, let the matter drop, and quickly pivoted the conversation to something else entirely, as if the whole exchange had never happened. But the seed had been planted. While his coworkers chatted around him, Max sat silently, picking at his food, his mind miles away. He didn't want to believe what Alex had said. He told himself it was probably a simple mix-up. Still, an uncomfortable doubt had crept in. What if Alex hadn't been wrong? What if there was something Max hadn't seen, hadn't wanted to see? That evening, something shifted. Max began to pay closer attention to everything. He watched Lucy more carefully, listened more closely to her tone, her excuses, her little gestures, and it didn't take long before cracks started to show. She seemed to be taking far longer on each piece she worked on, spending days on things that normally took hours. Even when she claimed to have been sewing all day, there was an odd, hollow tone to her words. "You wouldn't believe how long this dress took me," she sighed once, waving a hand toward the ironing board with what looked like forced disappointment. Like she was putting on a performance she wasn't fully invested in. A few nights later, over dinner, Max casually steered the conversation toward her business. Lucy launched into a story about how swamped she'd been with new orders. "Honestly, I think I'm stuck in a rut," she chuckled, as if poking fun at her own situation. But something in her voice didn't quite match her words. It was almost like she'd rehearsed it, like she knew he wasn't usually all that curious about her work and assumed he wouldn't question her too deeply. But Max was questioning now. By the end of the week, the uneasy feeling in his chest had grown heavier. His mind kept circling back to that brief chat with Alex. The suspicion refused to go away. He found himself glancing at Lucy's phone whenever she left the room, hoping for a hint, a slip, anything. But she seemed careful. Nothing suspicious ever surfaced. And that only made things worse. He didn't know what to believe anymore, or how to bring it up without sounding paranoid. But one thing was certain, something didn't add up. One day, during a particularly restless lunch break, Max gave in to an impulse he couldn't quite explain. He decided to head home without warning. It wasn't something he ever did. In fact, it was wildly out of character. But his gut was practically yelling at him, and for once, he chose to listen. What he found, or rather, what he didn't find, spoke volumes. The apartment was empty. Well, this just got interesting," Max muttered under his breath, slipping off his shoes as if still playing the part of the tired office worker, coming home for a quick break. But this wasn't just curiosity anymore. It was suspicion. And now he was acting on it. He grabbed his phone and dialed Lucy, keeping his tone light, like a husband simply checking in. She answered with a weary sigh, telling him she'd been pouring herself into a tricky blouse all morning and was now stretched out on the sofa, catching her breath. But as she spoke, Max caught something strange, a faint hum in the background, something not quite right. It didn't sound like their place. It was subtle, but it pricked at his nerves. Grinding his teeth slightly, Max played along. "Hey, how about I swing by now? That soup you made last night's been on my mind," he said, keeping his voice breezy, like it was the most natural request in the world. There was a pause, just a beat too long. Then Lucy responded, clearly fumbling for a reason to say no. But when none came to mind, she gave in. "All right, sweetheart," she said, a little too sweetly. "I'll be here. I'll put the kettle on." Max ended the call with a small, grim smile and dropped into the armchair. Crossing his arms over his chest, he exhaled slowly, his eyes fixed on the door. "Let's see what kind of story she brings with her," he muttered, settling in for what he knew would be a performance. 15 minutes passed. Then the door flung open and Lucy rushed inside, her hair tied back in a hasty, uneven ponytail. She clutched a shopping bag in one hand, cheeks slightly flushed. "I thought I had time to grab something you needed," she said quickly, her words tumbling over themselves. "Ran to the store real quick." Max didn't say a word, just watched her, expression unreadable. She paused, sensing the silence, then pressed on. "Have you been waiting long?" she asked, trying to sound casual but miss on the mark. Her gaze darted to his face, "Since I got your call. How long have you been here?" she added, her voice softer now, touched by a creeping uncertainty she couldn't quite mask. "Let's take our time, Lucy," Max said in a calm but strained voice. "How far away were you from home when you picked up the phone?" Lucy froze. Something in his tone, measured, almost clinical, made her blood run cold. Her eyes flicked to his, searching for softness, but found only steel. "You were already heading home from work, weren't you?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Max didn't answer, just held her gaze with a look that said everything. She was caught, and they both knew it. Panicked, Lucy's mouth opened, but no words came. Whatever explanation she'd been scrambling to find had vanished. Then Max leaned in slightly. Not shouting, not angry, just clear and deliberate. "Do you know him well?" "No," she said faintly, the word clinging to her lips like ash. She knew any version of the truth would only make things worse. And Max, well, Max had already decided. That very afternoon, without a dramatic scene or second thoughts, Max packed her things and showed her the door. Everything she owned went with her, except the sewing gear he had gifted her with such care. "She can earn it on her own now," he said flatly, almost with a cruel sense of justice. If he could have sold the equipment and washed his hands of it all, he gladly would have. Their marriage ended right there, with the quiet finality of a slammed door. Lucy, who had no choice and even fewer friends, had to rent a cramped room, making ends meet with what little she had. It didn't take long for Max to find out the rest of the story. As it always happens, this became known through mutual acquaintances. It turned out that the man Lucy was dating was the husband of one of her clients. Apparently, he used his wife's fittings as an excuse to visit Lucy. Whether the affair sparked in hushed conversations during appointments or through DMs later on, no one could say for sure. But what followed was a slow-motion train wreck of betrayals. When the client discovered what had happened, how deeply the deception had run, everything exploded, and the fallout was brutal. The woman's connection spoke louder than any confrontation. Lucy's name became toxic. Orders dried up. Clients vanished. Her reputation, once quietly growing by word of mouth, was reduced to whispers of scandal. Even the man she'd risked it all for began pulling away, avoiding her calls, fading into the background now that the thrill was gone. Broke, jobless, and emotionally abandoned, Lucy faced a stark new reality. She had started with everything: a loving home, a devoted partner, a life carved out with care. But in the end, it was all undone by one reckless decision. And the consequences didn't just catch up with her, they swallowed her whole.